Shalom and welcome. With me today, once again, is my very good friend, Jonathan Pollard. Shalom.
Shalom, Rav.
Good to be with you again. Today, for the record, is Monday, Kaf He B'Tammuz, the 25th day of Tammuz Tavshin Peh, according to our Jewish calendar, corresponding to the 21st of July 2025, according to the Gregorian calendar. And we have a number of interesting points that need some clarification. But there is much going on, as always, in the Middle East. And although today it's fair to say that there is much going on everywhere in the world, everywhere that you look, things are in flux, in a state of flux. Look at Europe, for example. So it's not just the Middle East, but at the present time in the Middle East, let us Let us take a look at Syria. What can you tell us, Jonathan, about recent events in Syria regarding various unspeakable massacres and acts of and atrocities vis-a-vis the Druze and Christians and others in that country?
We have to go back a few months to the fall of Bashar Assad's regime, which left a power vacuum in southwest.
Just to remind everyone, that was, I believe, in December of last year.
Yeah, thereabouts. And at that point, we took advantage of the situation by launching a very successful aerial campaign that destroyed much of Assad's remaining military equipment, whether it be aircraft, armor, surface-to-air missiles, etc., to prevent it from falling into the hands of the Islamic terrorists of the HTS organization led by this fellow Julani. I won't call him al-Shara because that's kind of giving him a degree of acceptance that he shouldn't have. And we were able to seize quickly the Syrian Hermon, Mount Hermon, which is a tremendous strategic site. And we had the understanding that we would be responsible for the Druze and other minorities, Christian and Alawite, in southwestern Syria, kind of under the geographic area of the Sweda Governorate. This is what it's called, based on Sweda, which is the capital of that governorate. At that time, we missed an opportunity. And it was a terrible oversight strategically of moving troops in, perhaps as much as 2 divisional scale battle groups into the Druze area to protect them. The Druze at the time were asking actually to be annexed by Israel. And
not just at that time, to the present day.
Well, up until the present day. And there are others that in the Druze heartland that, would prefer to just have a robust autonomy, which is fine. I don't care which one it is. But we failed to do that. We failed to put troops into that area to protect the border area between the Druze, the new government, HTS government in Damascus, and the Sunni Bedouin tribes, which have had a centuries-long hatred against the Druze. And if we had done that, if we had created a real buffer, we would have had the time to train or stand up, as they say, a Druze army. The Druze are willing to fight. They're very good fighters, but they don't have the equipment or the organization to do so. We could have prevented them. Okay, so we didn't do that. And then there was this effort by Qatar and Turkey, and also by the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Europe, especially France, and unfortunately the United States, to, as I say, kasha this new Syrian government in Damascus. Shortly after they took over, and they are unrepentant ISIS guys. I mean, there's just no question about it. HTS itself is a branch of Al Qaeda. It was Al Qaeda in Syria. They haven't renounced that at all. And many of Giuliani's appointments, ministerial appointments, are guys that still owe their allegiance to the Al Qaeda, quote, caliphate. So shortly after he took office, there was a massacre, a horrible massacre of Alawites in Syria's coastal areas near Tartus and Latakia. This is the minority that was the foundation of the Assad regime, because they were Alawis themselves, or Alawites. And everybody just kind of poo-pooed that and looked the other way and said it was an aberration. And Giuliani ordered an investigation of this massacre, which he just got, by the way. Nothing is being done about it. And people at that point should have been aware of the fact that they were going to do the same thing to the Druze. Well, the Americans at that point appointed a guy by the name of Tom Barak, Barrack. He's what I call the jihadi massacre facilitator. He is officially the U.S. Special Envoy to Syria. He is totally in the pay of Qatar and Turkey. He's a businessman, a real estate billionaire. He knows nothing about the area at all. He has no diplomatic experience, but he does know what side the toast is buttered, so to speak. So he has been trying as hard as he can to turn Giuliani into somebody that the West can work with, because, well, he wears a pretty nice Brioni suit.
Well, nowadays he's very nicely decked out.
Tailored. He's very nicely tailored.
Yes, he has
And
fancy suits
Trump,
from the correct tailors and nice ties.
right,
And obviously he's a totally different person.
correct. And Trump was bowled over by his appearance and his manliness when Mohammed bin Sultan, MBS, basically introduced them in Saudi Arabia during Trump's last visit there. And it was nauseating to watch what happened. This butcher, this Al-Qaeda terrorist, was being treated as an acceptable member of the international community when he was anything but that. So in walks this guy, Tom Barak, a very good friend of the president's, by the way. And he has basically instituted a policy at the behest of Qatar and Turkey to make the Muslim Brotherhood acceptable, plain and simple. So in the days and weeks leading up to the latest atrocity that happened in Syria, the invasion of the Druze heartland, from what I understand, there was no intelligence surprise by Israel. Israel was tracking the buildup of jihadi forces. This is what they call in Arabic Daesh or ISIS in their own uniforms. And they claim they don't take any orders from the government, although they're directed by Turkish advisors based in Damascus and Giuliani's advisors, military advisors, and the Bedouin tribes, the Bedouin, Sunni Bedouin thugs, I'll put it that way. Now, Tom Barak has been promoting the idea of including the Al-Qaeda terrorists in the newly formed Syrian army. And they switch uniforms very quickly. If you're not careful, you'll miss it. but there's photographic evidence now of whole units of ISIS soldiers, Al-Qaeda soldiers, changing into Syrian army uniforms, then changing back to ISIS uniforms, and now changing into Sunni Bedouin uniforms. Why Sunni Bedouins? Because the Sunnis are saying we're not part of the government, so we can't be held to the ceasefire that's been enacted by the Americans.
We're just freelance.
We're just freelance terrorists.
Freelance genocide perpetrators of genocide.
Correct.
We cannot be bound by any agreement.
Nothing. So what happened was, instead of launching a preemptive strike on these, the buildup of these terrorists on the Druze border, the Israeli government was deterred by the American government, led by, in this case, Tom Barak, who, now it's been established, wanted a genocide against the Druze. And I'm saying this advisedly because the information is established. He and people like Maher Bitar, a National Security Council official, and Hadi Amar, a State Department official, and others within the national diplomatic and national security establishment in Washington. There's 6 people all together involved in this, formed together to promote this massacre. That's the only way I can put it, in order to permit the Muslim Brotherhood under Gilani's control to destroy the Druze, just as they tried to do to the Alawis or the Alawites in the Syria's coastal province. So when the invasion started, Israel had been deterred from doing anything. And there was an emergency meeting by Netanyahu and Israel Katz. And because of domestic pressure, of course, by the Israeli Druze community, but by many others, on Netanyahu, he allowed our Air Force to intervene. It was not well coordinated, it was superficial, and it wasn't effective enough. And what happened was, the invasion really happened at that point. And it got so bad, the scenes, the video, again, just like October 7th, these guys are very proud of what they're doing. There was a horrible scene of a hospital that had been, well, it looked like a Druze hospital. It looked like October 7th. There were scenes of Druze women being gang raped, then beheaded, their heads being, tossed about like soccer balls. There was a video that I got, and I actually disseminated it, of Druze men being forced to jump off a balcony of a apartment building, a high apartment building, at gunpoint, while they were shot at by ISIS or Al-Qaeda terrorists who were screaming, Allah Akbar and all that stupidity. So it was a massacre a la October 7th. So Netanyahu upped the heat, so to speak, by allowing the Air Force to intervene even more than they had before. It was a disaster, a complete and utter disaster. But when this guy, Tom Barak, realized that, his guys were being hit hard, and after we hit Damascus, but it was not in a way that was meant to really damage much of anything. There were lots of demonstration bombings by our Air Force. But for example, I'll give you an example. The Syrian military headquarters, the building should have been leveled. With the amount of ordnance bombs that were dropped on that building, the whole thing should have been leveled, but it wasn't. The bombs, if you look at where the bombs fell, they were designed basically to impress Gilani with the seriousness with which, we opposed what he was planning to do and doing in the Sueda governing. So there were lots of mistakes made by us. Now, Barak put together some kind of ceasefire, which is not being observed by Julani's forces, the Syrian army, changing out of uniforms. The ISIS / Al-Qaeda guys are still fighting in the governing. The Bedouin tribes are just out of control. While we should have deployed, as I said before, if not before, at least now, a large ground force, 2 divisional scale battle groups to guard the border while we trained and equipped a Druze army. The Druze should be offered, I believe, autonomy, backed by us. We should be the defenders of the minorities in this region, whether it's the Alawis or the Christians or the Druze. And we're really not doing that at all right now. We're still bending to this guy Tom Barak. If we could, Tom Barak and people like Maher Bitar and Hadi Amar and others who led a media campaign to blacken us. Can you believe that? Instead of condemning the murderers, the rapists, and these homicidal, genocidal maniacs that were unleashed on the Druze, what did they do? They organized a media campaign out of Washington that characterized Bibi as a, quote, madman, quote unquote, dropping bombs all over the place. And this was a public relations campaign led or sponsored by Qatar and Turkey and implemented by Tom Barak and this Maher Bitar, Hadi Amar, and about 4 others in Washington, all of whom belong in jail for aiding and abetting a genocide, an attempted genocide. So we're in a position right now, I guess, in conclusion, where I consider that we really blew it again in this time in Syria. We had indications and warning that an invasion was going to take place, and we let ourselves be deterred from taking a preemptive action by the Americans. Once the invasion was underway, we intervened intermittently and without sufficient force. Finally, when we did intervene, and we were inflicting serious casualties, to include the bombing in demonstration bombings, I call it, in Damascus, suddenly we were forced to accept a ceasefire by the very people, Tom Barak and others in Washington, who had organized and implemented an attempted genocide against the Christians and the Druze, primarily, in the Sueda governing. What are we to make of all of this? We need a new government in Israel that will stand up for what's right, not just for us, but for the minorities around us, whether it's, the Christians in Lebanon or the Christians in Syria, the Alawites in Syria, the Druze, the Kurds. For all these people, we should be the defenders of the Middle East minorities. But what is happening now is we are allowing people like Tom Barak and his cronies in Washington to attempt a genocide comparable to what happened against the Yazidis in Iraq and the Assyrian Christians in Iraq and the Copts in Sinai. It's pro-Muslim brotherhood. And it's brought to you by the same people in Qatar and Turkey that have been, at the forefront of blackening Israel's good name. So once again, we have a weak government here, a weak government that has feet of clay and that is just being pushed around by a corrupt, transactional government in Washington. When I say everything, what I mean by that is they get paid. These people are getting paid, and they do the bidding of countries like Qatar and Turkey.
All of this, Jonathan, raises the question, where is the rest of the United States government? Where, first of all, is Trump? Where is his Secretary of State, Rubio? Where is his Defense Secretary? Where are these people?
The real disappointment is Marco Rubio. He's being led around by the nose by Tom Barrack, mostly because Trump made it very clear to Rubio that people like Witkoff, I call him Witless, Witkoff and Barrack are in charge of this Middle East agenda right now. And what is that agenda? The agenda is making sure that Hamas survives and making sure that al-Julani and his Muslim Brotherhood thugs are allowed to entrench themselves in Syria and become part of the international order, an acceptable member of the international order. Rubio, I'm sorry, has been a horrible, horrible disappointment in this regard. And Trump seems to be clueless as to what's going. He wants that Nobel Peace Prize. And people like Tom Barrack and Witkoff have been very good, very effective in convincing him that rehabilitating Syria under the aegis of al-Qaeda would be a good step in that direction of winning the Nobel Peace Prize. Look, Rubio should know all the information and more that I've come across over the past 2 weeks that clearly show that this guy, Tom Barrack, and Maher Bitar of the NSC and Hadi Amar of the State Department are guilty of attempted genocide. They should be on trial. They've taken money. They're corrupt as hell, as anything right now. They're in the pay of foreign governments who are trying to commit a genocide against minorities in Syria. Excuse me, there should be a special prosecutor in the United States appointed to investigate these people and to indict them if necessary for an attempted genocide. The evidence is all there, including phone calls, signals, intercepts. Everything is there implicating these people, especially Tom Barrack. But instead, nothing is happening. And Rubio just put his head down and he's just going along with Trump. So it's unfortunate that we have a government that won't stand up to this. I mean, why is it that the government of Israel is not disseminating the videos that I've seen and that I've disseminated? The government, the Israeli government should be doing this, not someone like me. I'm just an individual. We should have the Israeli government pushing back against this criminal, Tom Barrack, and saying, really, this guy with his, the Qataris, with the Qatari money and Turkish money and Turkish influence, forcing guys off of balconies, gang raping women and beheading them. I mean, all these videos are there and they should have been pushed through the media. But, if there's one thing you can say about the Israeli government, they are absolutely clueless when it comes to media hasbara. I'll use that word. Positive propaganda, whatever you want to say, explaining our case. And Bibi just allowed himself to be outmaneuvered by this Tom Barrack, whom we should have nothing to do with at all. We never should have accepted a ceasefire. We should have pounded them in Damascus. We should have leveled the Ministry of Defense. We should have leveled the presidential palace and told Julani, you're on the list and all your ministers. You think you're going to, carry off a genocide against, 700,000 innocent people like you did against the Yazidis and the Assyrian Christians in Iraq and against the Copts in Sinai? No, not on our watch. And if you attempt to do it, we'll drive you out of Damascus. But they didn't do that. That's just not Bibi. That's just not the Israeli political establishment. They can't generate that kind of, well, I would use the
Vision.
word self-respect.
I would use the term vision, because the truth of the matter is,
Yeah,
as we have discussed on other occasions, everything that we are witnessing today in Syria, the country known as Syria, and the country next door to it and to us, known as Lebanon, and for that matter, Iraq, etc. All these countries are the inventions of European colonialist meddling over 100 years ago. I referred, of course, to the Sykes-Picot agreement or cabal, if you wish, or conspiracy to maintain British and French control of the Middle East. Now,
correct.
because I am aware of the fact that many people listening to us now are not really familiar with the Sykes-Picot agreement
Agreement.
or conspiracy that goes back to 1916, if I'm not mistaken. Perhaps you could do us all the favor of reminding us what is this? What were the events that led up to this so-called agreement, whereby the British and the French carved up the Middle East, that invented these artificial, completely unviable, volatile, and impossible countries that can never, ever live in peace with amongst themselves within their own borders, let alone with their neighbors.
When World War One in the Middle East erupted, there were discussions very quickly amongst the British and the French concerning how the Turkish Empire, the Ottoman Empire, was going to be carved up at the end of the war. And the French and the British laid out, with Sykes representing the British and Picot representing the French, basically said about creating new boundaries, spheres of influence, if you will, that later became, in the case of France, mandates. Just like the British had a mandate over Palestine, the French had a mandate over Syria and Lebanon. The British had one over Iraq. And a lot of these borders were determined by economic interests. For the British, especially looking at Iraq, that was not a unitary state under, or province even, under Vilayet, rather, under Turkish Ottoman control, but were made up of three parts. Basra in the south, Baghdad and Kirkuk in the north. And the British just decided, for organizational efficiency, to turn them into a country.
And because of the oil reserves.
It's mostly because of the oil reserves. And what they did was they created a country just like they did in Africa. The borders in Africa right now make absolutely no sense at all. And that process was replicated in the Middle East, where the borders were determined on the basis of colonial needs. I'll put it that way. So the French got Syria and Lebanon, and at least in the case of Syria, they had a lot of problems. The French had horrible problems imposing their colonial will on the locals. The Druze in particular never really accepted it. There were Syrian nationalists that never did. And the French, which a lot of people don't realize, had a colonial war in Syria to suppress and to destroy a nationalist uprising and a Druze uprising against French control, which they put down. So what you have right now in Syria in particular is an unnatural country. It's a synthetic country. It's a Frankenstein country made up of bits and pieces that had never been joined in a unitary state before. And when you have initially organizations like the Ba'ath Party, the Socialist Ba'ath Party, under Hafez al-Assad, Bashar's father, they imposed a unity on the country at the point of the bayonet. And because there were Alawites, the Sunnis were suppressed, brutalized, to the same extent that in Iraq, the Sunnis suppressed the Shia for 20, 30, 40 years. So what we're dealing with right now, as you pointed out, is kind of the residue or the consequences of colonialism, which is why when Israel defends the minorities, say in Syria, or the Christians in Lebanon, we are revolutionary. We are anti-colonial. This is something that a lot of people, my friend Yehuda HaKohen, who's the editor of the Visions magazine, has been pushing this whole idea that we should present ourselves as the real revolutionaries in the Middle East, because we oppose the borders created by European colonial powers. We should be in favor of empowering minorities, either for autonomy or maybe even inclusion into Israel. So in the case of the Druze, we have a tremendous opportunity to say we are protecting a minority. We are giving them the autonomy that they should have had back after the First World War, but the French prevented them from having it. And that we will intervene on the side of threatened minorities, endangered by encompassing states that were imposed by European colonial powers whenever they are threatened, whether it's the Yazidis, well, there are hardly any left, but the Yazidis in Iraq, or the Assyrian Christians in Iraq, or the Kurds, or the Christians in Syria and Lebanon, or the Copts in Egypt, in Sinai, or even in this case, the Druze and the Alawis. We should be on the side of the minorities. People tend to forget that there were two horrible influences on the Middle East. One was European colonialism, and the other one was Arab imperialism. And we are dealing with the consequences of both. The jihadis right now ensconced in Damascus represent just another face of Arab imperialism. A very violent face. There's nothing cultural about them at all, or soft about them. They're violent, wicked murderers. And so we should be anti-imperialist. We should be opposing them wherever we can. Many Arabs, in fact, don't want to be under their influence. They're scared to death of them. I mean, look at Afghanistan right now with the Taliban. Women can't work. They can't go to school. They can't show their face in public. The people in Syria are pretty sophisticated. People like the Druze, that is, are pretty sophisticated people. They don't want this imposed on them, nor do the Alawites, nor do the Christians. So I think it's important that you brought up this whole issue of Sykes-Picot and the borders that were drawn up in the wake of World War I to create artificial states that were really supposed to serve the interests of European colonial powers, not the local people. In the case of Israel, we have to understand that of all the countries that emerged from World War I, Israel was really eventually was the most legitimate one. We're an ancient people back in our biblical roots, geographic roots. And despite the nature of our society with people from all over the world, um, we're still a unitary state. We make sense politically. And it's something that we should offer as a gift, if you will. If not out of altruism, a sense of altruism, then calculation, to threaten minorities like the Druze. We can give them autonomy in this way to governate. We can kind of reject the imperialism of French imperialism, later supported by or accepted by the Ba'ath regime of the Assads, and give them the freedom that they deserve and that they want. But again, I can't believe for the moment that the Americans understand this. They're a lot of them are just, especially in the State Department, totally ignorant of history. And unfortunately, our leaders here in Israel are equally ignorant and incapable of, as you would put it, vision to seize an opportunity, a golden opportunity to portray ourselves as true anti-colonial revolutionaries. It would be a real tremendous development if we could do that.
And to be frank, Jonathan, on top of protecting innocence and various minorities in these countries, like the Christians today in Lebanon and the Christians in Syria and the Druze in Syria, and we should also mention in the north of Syria, you have the
Kurds and the Alawites.
the Kurds, etc. We also have legitimate self-interest. First of all, if we're talking about southern Syria, we're talking about a part of the Jewish people's homeland going back thousands of years. We're talking about the Bashan, an area known as the Bashan. And as we see in recent days, many of the people who populate that border area just across from our border, these Sunni Bedouin Islamo-Nazis that you mentioned earlier, with their beheadings and gang rapes and other atrocities. There are many of these people right on our doorstep, and their greatest aspiration in life is to do to us exactly that which Hamas did to us on
Precisely right.
Aseret Taushin Peidar, the 7th of October 2023.
Correct.
And it's also self-defense. It's also humanitarian. It's also anti-colonial. It is also historically true and authentic and real. In other words, what we need to aim for, if we had real leadership, visionary and resolute leadership, then what we would be aiming for is to redraw the map of the Middle East, do away with these fake, artificial colonial states drawn up by simply very often just taking a ruler and a pen and drawing long straight lines.
That's what they did.
That's how Iraq and Syria and other countries just came into being from nothingness, literally from ex nihilo.
Correct.
And we should be stating loud and clear, first of all, the time for British and French colonialism in the Middle East is over, long over. And the Sykes-Picot Agreement was simply the last hurrah of European colonialism. They themselves didn't understand that their
day was numbered
on center stage was very limited, and they were about to be removed from center stage. They didn't understand this. So they thought they could draw up new colonial assets based on various interests, mainly on oil, and controlling trade routes and sea lanes and what have you. And thought they could get away with it. And it's actually it could be discussed, and it should be mentioned that the United States at that time, over 100 years ago, 110 years ago, allowed them to get away with it, but shouldn't have. Woodrow Wilson should have been much more proactive, I think, in putting an end to European colonialism. He did try to do so in
He
certain
did
other
try.
areas and ways, and succeeded. But in these cases, for instance, Lebanon, Syria, and Iraq, he was not successful. And the totally fake Palestine mandate that was granted to the British, which they immediately, of course, created,
They
and even the fake invention known as Transjordan, by taking an unemployed prince from Arabia and placing him on a non-existent
who had
throne.
lost civil war.
Right. Placing him on a throne in this new thing called Transjordan, which was just a puppet, literally a puppet of the British at that time.
And the same in Iraq. There was a Hashemite, another prince, a brother that was put on the throne there. I mean, the British, there was no historical precedent for that there. You know, a Sunni prince from Saudi Arabia being put on the throne
in a Shiite majority country.
In a Shiite majority country, correct. You know, but these are this is the residue, as you pointed out, of the European colonial agenda, so to speak, in the Middle East, that should be just chucked in their entirety. And the best place to start this right now is in Syria. But again, as you pointed out, we need a government division.
What has happened in recent days and weeks, and for that matter, for many years, particularly with reference to Lebanon and Iraq also. After all, Iraq has been increasingly just a hellhole and a disaster, not waiting to happen, but there's actually happening before our eyes. And this has been going on in Iraq for decades. Has been going on for decades. So we should be stating these things loud and clear. We should be saying that most of the problems in the Middle East are actually the direct outcomes and results of British and French meddling in the affairs of local populations that were all of a sudden found themselves no longer encroached upon and ruled over by the Turks, by the Ottomans. Almost all problems in the Middle East can be traced back to that imperialist meddling. And now is the time. If you needed any proof of this, well, just look at what's going on in Syria right now. Now is the time to say Syria is a fake state. It's not viable. It makes no sense. It's ahistoric.
It never had any historical precedent.
And things have to be, the borders and the boundaries have to be rewritten and reconsidered. And as a first step, take over southern Syria.
But look, what American imperialism is doing now, as defined by Tom Barrack and people like Maher Bitar and Hadi Amar and others in the administration, are basically trying to recreate a form of Arab imperialism carried out by the Muslim Brotherhood. And this is maybe even worse than what the British and the French did in Sykes-Picot. Because at least with them, I mean, they imposed some sense of order, and, you know, the French had what they called the mission civilisatrice, the civilizing mission, whatever you want to call it. In this case, the form that of American imperialism is taking is to back the most thuggish, brutal, genocidal people in the world to recreate the golden era of, quote, golden era of Arab imperialism, which absolutely destroyed the indigenous peoples of the Middle East and North Africa.
Just ask the Assyrians. Just ask the Assyrians in Iraq and in Syria, the ancient Assyrians, the remnants of the Assyrian people who were Christians, who were massacred by ISIS. Just ask the Copts in Egypt. Just ask other nations in North Africa. It's Arab imperialism that destroyed the Middle East, going back 1,400 years.
100%. And these people now in the Trump administration, like Tom Barrack and I would say even Witkoff, who are agents of the Muslim Brotherhood. They may think they're just working with Qatar and Turkey, but they are actually agents of the Muslim Brotherhood, are trying to kind of recreate this Arab imperialism with some of the worst aspects of that experience that happened, where the indigenous peoples in the Middle East were just overwhelmed and slaughtered and subsumed within first the Abbasid, then the Umayyad, and then later the Ottoman empires. So when you're ignorant of history and you're totally uninterested in doing anything better for the countries in the Middle East, this is what you get. You get people being thrown off balconies and shot at by ISIS in Sweden. You get horrible scenes of women being raped and beheaded, and you get hospitals just being turned into they look like October 7th, where people were just slaughtered in the hospital. An entire hospital was just slaughtered by these people. And as you pointed out, a Syrian soldier that was caught by the Druze in Bedouin uniform admitted on tape that his orders, and this came from Giuliani, that his orders were to kill women and children, to kill all the Druze, including women and children. And this is what the American government is supporting right now. Really? But you wouldn't know all of this if you were listening to the media, because the Qataris in particular, and Tom Barrack and his supporters in Washington, his allies in Washington, have been waging a media campaign to suppress this information and to characterize Bibi as a madman for having the audacity, if you will, to bomb Damascus. Okay.
By the way,
so,
Jonathan, you do not have to even go as far afield as Sweden or other places in Syria, or the persecution over the past 1400 years of the Copts, who are the original Egyptians, who are non-Arab people.
And the same thing with the Maronites in Lebanon. They were the original.
The Maronites in Lebanon, etc., and the Assyrians in Syria and Iraq, what became Syria and Iraq. There were many more Christians going back to pre-Islamic days, and even after the breaking out of the Islamo-Nazi hordes from Arabia in the time of Muhammad, or just after Muhammad. There were many more Christians in the Middle East, in all the countries that we mentioned and others, and many of them were massacred, and many others were forcibly converted. This includes Jews, both here in our ancient homeland in Israel, and in other places, other parts of the Middle East where there were Jewish communities, but in much larger numbers, and more specifically, this is true of Christian communities all over the Middle East. And you don't have to go so far afield. You can take a look here, just south of Jerusalem, a place known, which we call Bethlehem, which is known to many Christians as Bethlehem. Not so long ago, before the arrival of the Fakistinian Arafat, right? The fake Arafat forces, known as the PLO and what have you. Before they arrived, before Shimon Peres and Yitzhak Rabin and their criminal gang, in their infinite wisdom, allowed these people to take over certain areas in our homeland, such as Bethlehem. Bethlehem was 80% Christian. And today there is barely a handful of Christians left in Bethlehem. Now, ask yourself a very simple question. Where did they all go? Oh, the answer is some were killed and the rest fled. And this is a pattern which has been repeated throughout the Middle East for the past 1,400 years, but more specifically over the past last few decades, over the last 100 years, wherever an Islamic Arab authority took root, it immediately began to persecute all other religious minorities, particularly Christians, Jews, and Druze.
And don't even talk about the Baha'i.
No,
That's another
the list
group.
is, unfortunately, the list is too long for us to cover all of these topics in our discussion today.